The sun hung low over the small town of Willow Creek, Texas, casting long shadows across the dusty main street as Sophia Jacobs ran for her life. Her blue gingham dress torn at the hem and her golden hair falling free from its pins. It was 1876, and in this corner of the frontier, a woman on the run was as good as guilty, especially when the man she was fleeing from was Harold Preston, the wealthiest rancher in the county and her legal husband of 6 miserable months. "Stop that woman!" The sheriff's voice boomed behind her, boots thundering on the packed dirt. "She's wanted for theft and abandonment of her marital duties." Sophia's lungs burned as she darted between buildings, clutching the small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring and the few dollars she had managed to save in secret. Theft, they called it, when she took nothing but what was rightfully hers. The irony might have made her laugh if she weren't so terrified. As she rounded the corner near the livery stable, she collided with a solid wall of man, the impact nearly knocking her off her feet. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into the most startling green eyes she had ever seen. "Please!" she gasped, the word barely audible as the shouts grew closer. "They're coming for me." The stranger, tall and broad-shouldered with a weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his face, assessed the situation in an instant. His gaze swept from her desperate expression to the approaching footsteps, and without hesitation, he stepped in front of her just as the sheriff and 2 deputies rounded the corner. "Hold it right there," Sheriff Blackwood commanded, his hand resting on his holster. "That woman is trying to escape arrest." The stranger's voice was deep and steady as he replied, "What seems to be the trouble, Sheriff?" "That woman behind you is Mrs. Preston. She's stolen property from her husband and abandoned her home. Step aside, mister." Sophia trembled, certain this would be the end of her desperate bid for freedom. But then the stranger did something that changed her life forever. "I believe you're mistaken, Sheriff," he said calmly. "This lady isn't Mrs. Preston. She's my wife." Chapter 1. Desperate measures. Ezekiel Sutton had ridden into Willow Creek with one purpose: to sell the horses he'd brought from his ranch in the Texas Hill Country and return home with supplies before winter set in. The last thing he expected was to claim a desperate stranger as his wife before the sheriff and half the town. Yet here he stood, one arm protectively around the trembling woman while Sheriff Blackwood's suspicious gaze bored into him. "Your wife, you say?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Funny, I don't recall seeing you around these parts before." "Just passing through on business," Ezekiel replied smoothly. "My wife and I were separated for a spell while I conducted my affairs. I sent for her to join me for the journey home." The woman beside him had enough sense to remain silent, though he could feel her quick, shallow breaths against his side. "What's your name, mister?" the sheriff demanded. "Ezekiel Sutton. I own a ranch near Fredericksburg." One of the deputies leaned in to whisper something to the sheriff, who frowned deeply before addressing Ezekiel again. "Mr. Preston insists this woman is his lawful wife, Sophia. They were married this spring in front of half the town." Ezekiel felt the woman Sophia stiffen beside him. He tightened his grip on her waist in what he hoped was a reassuring manner. "I can't speak to who Mr. Preston married," Ezekiel said with conviction. "But this is Sophia Sutton, my wife of 2 years. I have papers to prove it." He didn't, of course, but he prayed the sheriff wouldn't call his bluff. To his relief, the lawman seemed uncertain. "Well now, this is a peculiar situation," Sheriff Blackwood said, rubbing his chin. "Preston's mighty convinced, and he's an important man in these parts." "I understand," Ezekiel replied, "but I can't allow another man to claim my wife, important or not. If you'd like, we can sort this out at your office. I'd be happy to present our marriage certificate once I retrieve it from our belongings at the hotel." It was a gamble, but Ezekiel had learned long ago that confidence often carried more weight than truth on the frontier. The sheriff studied them both for a long moment. "Fine," he finally agreed. You two come by my office in 1 hour with those papers. Until then, I'll have a word with Mr. Preston." As the lawman retreated, Ezekiel maintained his calm demeanor, though his mind raced. He had just landed himself in a mess of trouble for a woman he didn't know from Eve. But something in her desperate eyes had spoken to him a plea he couldn't ignore. When the sheriff was out of earshot, Sophia stepped away from him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Thank you," she whispered, "but you don't understand what you've done. Harold Preston won't let this go. He's a dangerous man." Ezekiel studied her face, the fading bruise near her temple poorly concealed with powder, the wariness in her gaze that spoke of too many broken promises. "I reckon I understand more than you think, madam," he replied softly. "But we don't have much time. We need to get our stories straight, and then we need to leave town. Unless you'd prefer to stay and face your husband?" he asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. She swallowed hard. "No, but I can't ask you to risk yourself for me. You didn't ask. I offered." He glanced around the quiet alley. "Do you have anything you need to collect before we go?" Sophia clutched her small pouch tighter. "This is all I have in the world." The simplicity of her statement struck him. Ezekiel had known hardship in his life, but he had his ranch, his horses, his name. This woman had fled with nothing but a pouch of meager possessions and her determination to be free. "Then we'd best be on our way. I have horses at the livery. We'll head out the back roads. I know this country well enough to avoid the main trails." Sophia hesitated. "Mr. Sutton, Ezekiel, or Zeke if you prefer. If we're supposed to be married, you ought to use my given name." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Ezekiel, you should know that Harold will come after us. He doesn't tolerate what he sees as disrespect. And in his eyes, I am his property." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. "No person can own another, Mrs. Jacobs. Not anymore." "Preston," she corrected quietly, "though I never wanted the name." "Sutton," he countered with a determined look. "At least until we're safely away from here." For the first time, a genuine smile lit her face, transforming her features from merely pretty to striking. "Sophia Sutton, then, for now." Ezekiel found himself smiling back despite the gravity of their situation. "Let's go meet those horses of mine. We have a long ride ahead of us." Chapter 2. Flight into darkness. The setting sun painted the western sky in hues of orange and purple as Ezekiel led Sophia through the back alleys of Willow Creek toward the livery stable. They moved quickly but not so fast as to draw undue attention, Ezekiel's hand resting lightly at the small of Sophia's back to guide her. "I sold most of my stock already," he explained in hushed tones. "But I kept my mare, Willow, and a sturdy gelding named Buck for the return journey. Buck is steady enough for you to ride if you're comfortable in the saddle." Sophia nodded. "I grew up on a small farm near Austin. I can ride." When they reached the livery, the stable boy, a lanky youth of perhaps 16, looked up from his work mucking stalls. "Evening, Mr. Sutton. Coming for your horses." "That's right, Billy, and I'll need them saddled quickly. My wife and I need to make it to the next town before full dark." The lie came easily to Ezekiel's lips, surprising even himself. The boy's curious gaze flicked to Sophia, but he asked no questions as he hurried to ready the horses. While they waited, Ezekiel gathered his supplies: 2 bedrolls, a small tent, cooking implements, and provisions he'd purchased for his return journey. "It won't be comfortable," he warned Sophia quietly, "but it'll have to do until we reach somewhere safe. After what I've endured these past months, a hard ground under the stars sounds like luxury," she replied, her voice barely audible. The words sent a surge of protective anger through Ezekiel. He had suspected as much from the fading bruise on her temple, but hearing it confirmed hardened his resolve. Whatever trouble he was courting by helping her flee, it was worth it. Within minutes, Billy had the horses saddled and ready. Ezekiel paid the boy a little extra for his quick work, with a gentle warning not to mention their departure until morning. As he helped Sophia mount Buck, he noticed her wince slightly. "Are you injured?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She shook her head. "Nothing fresh, just reminders." The simple statement told him everything he needed to know. Without another word, he swung into Willow's saddle and led them out the back way of the livery. Avoiding the main street where they might be spotted by the sheriff or worse, Harold Preston himself. They rode in silence until the lights of Willow Creek faded behind them and the vast Texas landscape spread before them, bathed in the final glow of twilight. Only then did Ezekiel slow their pace to spare the horses for the long journey ahead. "We'll ride a few more hours before making camp," he said. "There's a creek about 10 miles east that offers good cover. We can rest there until dawn." Sophia nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "Do you think they'll follow us tonight?" "Not likely. The sheriff promised us an hour, and Preston won't know you're gone with me until the sheriff tells him. Even then, tracking us in the dark would be foolish. But come morning, I expect they'll be after us." "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "You don't even know me, and I've made you a fugitive." Ezekiel turned in his saddle to look at her properly. In the fading light, with her golden hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars, she looked both vulnerable and determined, a combination that stirred something protective in his chest. "I made my choice, Mrs. Sophia. I don't regret it." "But why?" she pressed. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" He was silent for a long moment, considering the question. Finally, he said, "6 years ago, my sister found herself married to a man who turned cruel once the vows were spoken. No one would help her leave. She didn't survive the winter." Sophia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the vast emptiness surrounding them. "I'm so sorry, Ezekiel. So am I. I was away working cattle drives to send money home. By the time I returned." He shook his head, unwilling to continue that painful line of thought. "Let's just say I couldn't stand by and watch another woman trapped in the same situation." They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Sophia spoke again. "I was a schoolteacher before I married Harold. My father died last year, leaving debts I couldn't pay on my teacher's salary. Harold offered marriage and promised to clear the debts. He seemed kind, respected in town." Her voice hardened. "It took precisely 3 days after the wedding for him to show his true nature." "And no one helped you?" "In Willow Creek, the Preston name carries weight. Harold owns half the businesses and holds mortgages on most of the farms. The sheriff's brother works Preston land." Her hands tightened on Buck's reins. "Besides, a wife is expected to obey her husband. That's the law and the custom." "Not all laws deserve to be followed," Ezekiel said quietly. "And some customs need changing." As darkness fully enveloped them, Ezekiel led them off the trail, navigating by starlight and memory through the scrubby terrain. The night grew cold, as October nights in Texas often did, and he noticed Sophia shivering in her thin dress. "Here," he said, reining in Willow long enough to pull a heavy wool coat from his saddlebag. "Put this on. But you'll be cold. I'm used to it. Please." She accepted the coat gratefully, wrapping it around herself. It engulfed her smaller frame, but the immediate relief on her face was worth any discomfort Ezekiel might feel from the chill. By the time they reached the creek, the moon had risen, casting silver light over the landscape. Ezekiel found a sheltered spot among a stand of cottonwoods, far enough from any trail to avoid detection but close enough to water for their needs. "We'll rest here," he said, dismounting and moving to help Sophia down. She was stiff from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and her legs nearly buckled as they touched the ground. Ezekiel caught her by the elbows, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, looking up at him with those striking blue eyes. For a moment, they stood too close for propriety before Ezekiel gently released her and stepped back. "I'll see to the horses if you'd like to stretch your legs a bit," he offered, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. They were alone in the wilderness, and despite their pretense of marriage, they were strangers. Sophia seemed equally aware of their unusual circumstances. "I can help. I'm not afraid of work." Together, they unsaddled the horses and rubbed them down before securing them where they could graze on the sparse grass near the creek. Ezekiel built a small, nearly smokeless fire while Sophia arranged their meager camp. They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other as if they'd done this many times before. Over a simple meal of jerky, hard biscuits, and coffee, Sophia finally asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "What happens when we reach your ranch?" Ezekiel considered his answer carefully. "You'll be safe there. My foreman, Miguel, and his wife, Rosa, live on the property. Rosa would welcome the company of another woman. You can stay as long as you need while you decide what you want to do next." "And what about Harold? And the sheriff?" "My ranch is in Gillespie County, different jurisdiction, and I have friends in the area, people who would stand with us if trouble came." He paused. "But I won't lie to you, Sophia. Preston might still come looking. A man like that doesn't let go easily." She nodded, staring into the small fire. "No, he doesn't." After a moment, she looked up, her expression resolute. "I need to learn to protect myself better. In all ways. I can teach you to shoot," Ezekiel offered. "Every person on the frontier should know how to handle a firearm." "I'd like that." The firelight cast warm shadows across her face as she added, "And I want you to know that I intend to repay your kindness. I won't be a burden. I can cook, clean, and I was educated back east before I came to Texas with my father. I can keep accounts, write correspondence." "Sophia," he interrupted gently, "you don't need to earn your safety. That's not how this works." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "In my experience, everything comes with a price, Ezekiel." "Not this," he said firmly. "Not with me." The conviction in his voice seemed to surprise her. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "We should get some rest. Dawn comes early out here." Ezekiel nodded, respecting her need to maintain composure. "I'll take first watch. You sleep. You don't need to." "Yes, I do. Preston might not follow in the dark, but I won't risk your safety on that assumption." After a brief hesitation, Sophia accepted the bedroll he offered her. "Wake me for the second watch, then. Ezekiel. If we're in this together, we share the burden equally." He couldn't help but admire her spirit. Most women raised in comfort, as she likely had been, would be complaining about the hard ground and rough conditions. Instead, she was insisting on taking watch. "All right," he agreed. "I'll wake you in a few hours." As Sophia settled into her bedroll, wrapped in his coat against the chill, Ezekiel positioned himself against a tree trunk where he could observe their surroundings. The night was peaceful, with only the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a night bird breaking the silence. He glanced at Sophia's sleeping form, her golden hair spilling across the bedroll, and wondered at the strange turn his life had taken in the span of a few hours. He had left his ranch a week ago as a solitary man focused solely on his business. Now he was returning with a woman he barely knew, fleeing an abusive husband and quite possibly the law. Yet despite the danger and uncertainty, Ezekiel felt no regret. Something about Sophia Jacobs, her courage, her determination, Her vulnerability called to him in a way no woman had since before his sister's death had closed off that part of his heart. It was foolish, of course. Once she was safe at his ranch, she would likely want to move on, perhaps to one of the larger cities where a woman could make her own way more easily. And that would be for the best. Ezekiel had his ranch, his responsibilities, his solitary life. But as the moon tracked its path across the star-filled Texas sky, he allowed himself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like to have someone like Sophia Sutton truly be his wife. Chapter 3. Pursued. The dawn broke with a crimson streak across the eastern horizon, painting the landscape in fiery hues that matched the hair Ezekiel had been watching all night. Despite his promise to wake Sophia for the second watch, he had let her sleep. The peace on her face as she rested was something he suspected had been rare in recent months, and he couldn't bring himself to disturb it. Now, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cottonwoods, he gently touched her shoulder. "Sophia, it's time to wake up." She came awake instantly, her body tensing before her eyes focused on his face and recognition dawned. "You didn't wake me for my watch," she accused, sitting up. "You needed the rest more than I needed sleep," he replied simply, already moving to rekindle their small fire. "We should eat quickly and be on our way. We have a long ride ahead." Sophia joined him by the fire, her hair loose around her shoulders and his coat still wrapped around her slender frame. In the morning light, he could see more clearly the fading yellow-green bruise at her temple and another, partially hidden by her collar, on her neck. The sight of them rekindled his anger, but he kept his expression neutral as he handed her a tin cup of coffee. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. "About 3 days' ride at the pace we'll need to maintain. We'll skirt the main roads and settlements where we can. I know places to cross the rivers where we won't be seen." As they shared a simple breakfast of the remaining biscuits and some dried fruit, Ezekiel outlined their route. "We'll head northeast today, cross the Colorado River at a shallow point I know, then cut across country toward Fredericksburg. My ranch lies about 15 miles north of there." Sophia listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the terrain and potential dangers. It was clear she was no stranger to the practicalities of frontier travel, despite her Eastern education. "What will you tell your people when we arrive?" she asked as they began breaking camp. "About me, I mean." Ezekiel paused in the act of rolling up his bedroll. "The truth, I suppose, that you needed help escaping a bad situation. Miguel and Rosa aren't the kind to pry, and the ranch hands know better than to gossip about my business. And if Harold comes looking for me there, then he'll find himself facing more than just me," Ezekiel said firmly. "My neighbors and I look out for each other. Preston might have power in Willow Creek, but he'll find no friends in Gillespie County." They worked efficiently to erase all signs of their camp, then saddled the horses and were on their way as the sun crested the horizon. Ezekiel set a steady pace, alert to both their surroundings and Sophia's comfort in the saddle. Though she had said she could ride, he suspected it had been some time since she had undertaken a journey of this length. Around midday, as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream, Ezekiel's vigilance was rewarded. The distant sound of hoofbeats made him tense, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Riders coming," he said quietly to Sophia, who was refilling their canteens. "Get behind those rocks, quickly." She obeyed without question, moving swiftly to conceal herself while Ezekiel positioned himself where he could observe the approaching riders without being seen. Within minutes, 3 men on horseback came into view, following the stream. Even from a distance, Ezekiel recognized Sheriff Blackwood's distinctive hat. The man riding beside him was unfamiliar but expensively dressed Harold Preston, he guessed. The third rider appeared to be one of the deputies from town. Ezekiel remained motionless as they passed within 100 yards of their hiding place. He could hear snatches of their conversation carried on the breeze. "Tracks heading east," the deputy was saying. "Could have crossed near the trading post." "She wouldn't go east." Preston's voice was cold and precise. "There's nothing for her there." The schoolteacher would head north, toward Austin or Dallas, where she might find work. "We should split up," the sheriff suggested. "Cover more ground." "No," Preston replied sharply. "I want to be there when you find her. And him. The man has stolen my property and made a fool of me. I intend to see him hang for it." Their voices faded as they continued downstream, heading east despite Preston's protest. Ezekiel waited several long minutes after they had disappeared from view before signaling to Sophia that it was safe to emerge. Her face was pale but composed as she joined him. "That was Harold, wasn't it? With the sheriff?" Ezekiel nodded. "They're heading east for now, but Preston seemed convinced you'd go north." "He knows I have a friend in Dallas, another teacher I corresponded with." She looked troubled. "We should avoid the northern routes entirely." "Agreed. We'll continue northeast for now, then swing wide to the west before turning north again. It will add a day to our journey, but it should throw them off our trail." As they mounted up to continue their journey, Ezekiel noticed Sophia's hands trembling slightly as she gathered Buck's reins. Without thinking, he reached across to cover her hand with his own. "We'll stay ahead of them," he promised softly. "You're not going back to him, Sophia. Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I would rather die than return to that house." "It won't come to that," he assured her, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Come on. We've got ground to cover." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, avoiding open country where they might be spotted and sticking to the cover of wooded areas and ravines where possible. By late afternoon, they had reached the Colorado River at the crossing point Ezekiel had mentioned. The water was low this time of year, allowing them to ford it without much difficulty. On the other side, they found themselves in rougher country, rocky hills and limestone outcroppings that offered good protection but made for slower travel. As dusk approached, Ezekiel led them to a small canyon where a natural spring provided fresh water and the high walls sheltered them from view. "We should be safe here for the night," he said as they dismounted. "The entrance is narrow enough that we'll hear anyone approaching." Sophia nodded, clearly exhausted from the day's hard riding but making no complaint as she helped with the horses and camp preparations. This time, Ezekiel allowed her to take the first watch, recognizing her need to contribute equally to their partnership. As she sat by the small fire, rifle across her lap, Ezekiel studied her in the flickering light. The fear he had seen in her eyes earlier had been replaced by steady resolve. She was stronger than she appeared, this woman who had endured months of abuse only to flee with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch of treasured possessions. "May I ask you something, Ezekiel?" she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Of course. Your ranch, what is it like?" "I've only ever lived in town, or on my father's small farm." He smiled, relaxing back against his saddle. "It's not the biggest spread in the county, but it's good land. About 2,000 acres of rolling hills, with the Pedernales River cutting through the northeast corner. Good grass for cattle, though I focus more on horses. I've been building a reputation for breeding quality stock." "Is it beautiful?" she asked, a wistful note in her voice. "In its way," he replied thoughtfully. "There's a ridge on the western edge where you can watch the sunset behind the hills. In spring, the meadows are covered in bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. The house isn't much, just a 4-room cabin I built myself, but it's solid. I've been adding to it little by little over the years. It sounds peaceful. It is most days. Lonely sometimes, but peaceful." She looked at him curiously. You never married? No. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press, sensing perhaps that it was a subject he preferred to avoid. After a moment, he asked, What about you? Before Preston, what kind of life did you imagine for yourself? Sophia smiled sadly. I loved teaching. The children, their curiosity, watching them discover the world through books and learning. I thought perhaps I might eventually save enough to open my own small school someplace where educated women were valued. You could still do that, Ezekiel suggested. Once you're free of Preston, there's a growing settlement near Fredericksburg that could use a proper school. Perhaps. She stared into the fire. But first I need to establish myself as something other than a runaway wife. No respectable town would hire me if they knew my circumstances. Ezekiel frowned, recognizing the truth in her words. A woman who had fled her husband, regardless of the circumstances, would find few communities willing to accept her, much less entrust their children's education to her. What if they believed you were a widow? He suggested slowly. Or perhaps what? He hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. It's a problem for another day. For now, our priority is reaching the ranch safely. Sophia seemed about to press the issue but was interrupted by a distant sound that made them both freeze. Hoofbeats, moving slowly but steadily closer to their canyon hideaway. Ezekiel was on his feet in an instant, kicking dirt over their small fire to extinguish it. Get the horses, he whispered urgently. We need to move deeper into the canyon. Working quickly in the darkness, they gathered their belongings and led the horses away from the canyon entrance, following a narrow path that wound between the towering rock walls. The path ended at a small box canyon with steep sides that offered no exit but provided excellent cover. We're trapped here, Sophia whispered as they concealed themselves behind a large boulder. Better trapped with cover than caught in the open, Ezekiel replied, checking his Winchester. Stay low and keep quiet. They might pass by without spotting the canyon entrance in the dark. The minutes stretched painfully as they listened to the approaching riders. Ezekiel could feel Sophia's quick breaths beside him. Her shoulder pressed against his as they crouched behind the boulder. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm, feeling her trembling slightly beneath his touch. The riders drew closer, their voices now audible in the still night air. Waste of time, someone was saying. They could be miles from here by now. The tracks led this way. Another voice replied Preston's voice. Fresh tracks heading toward the river crossing. They can't be far. Ezekiel felt Sophia stiffen beside him at the sound of her husband's voice. He tightened his grip on her arm, a silent reminder to remain still and quiet. The hoofbeats slowed as the riders reached the entrance to the canyon. For a heart-stopping moment, Ezekiel thought they would enter, but after a brief pause, they continued on. Nothing here. The sheriff's voice drifted back to them. Let's check farther north. They waited in tense silence until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely before either of them dared to move or speak. That was too close, Sophia whispered, her voice unsteady. Ezekiel nodded, releasing his grip on her arm. They're following our trail. We'll need to be more careful about covering our tracks tomorrow. Do you think they'll come back? Not tonight. But they know we crossed the river, which means they'll be searching this side come morning. He glanced around their sheltered position. We should stay here until first light, then move out quickly. We'll head west for a while to throw them off, then turn north again when it's safer. Sophia agreed, and they settled in for an uncomfortable night, taking turns keeping watch. During his watch, Ezekiel found his thoughts returning to the half-formed idea he had begun to voice earlier. It was madness, of course completely improper and presumptuous, and yet it might offer Sophia the protection she needed to build a new life. But that was a conversation for another time. when they weren't being hunted across the Texas wilderness by an angry husband with the law at his side. For now, their priority was survival. Everything else could wait. Chapter 4. Sanctuary in the storm-dark clouds gathered on the western horizon as Ezekiel and Sophia rode hard across the open country, the wind carrying the unmistakable scent of an approaching storm. They had left their canyon hideaway at first light, carefully obscuring their tracks as they headed west before gradually turning northwest toward Gillespie County. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead," Ezekiel called over the rising wind. "We can shelter there until the storm passes." Sophia nodded, her hair whipping around her face as she urged Buck to keep pace with Willow. They had been riding for nearly 10 hours with only brief stops to rest the horses, and Ezekiel could see the fatigue in the set of her shoulders despite her determination not to show weakness. The first fat raindrops began to fall as the small, weathered cabin came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping that provided some natural shelter from the elements. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven by a wind that bent the prairie grass horizontal. Ezekiel dismounted quickly, helping Sophia down before leading the horses to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. Once the animals were secured and their gear stowed, they hurried inside, soaked to the skin despite their brief exposure to the deluge. The interior of the line shack was Spartan but clean, a single room with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed against one wall. Ezekiel immediately set about starting a fire in the stove while Sophia wrung water from her hair and dress. "It's not much," he apologized, glancing around the humble space. "But it's dry and the chimney doesn't smoke too badly." "It's perfect," Sophia replied sincerely. She moved to help him, gathering kindling from a box near the stove. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the small pieces of wood, and Ezekiel was struck by how natural it felt to work alongside her, as if they had done this countless times before. Once the fire was crackling in the stove, spreading welcome warmth throughout the small cabin, Ezekiel retrieved his saddlebags and pulled out a spare shirt and pair of trousers. "You should change into something dry," he said, offering the clothes to Sophia. "They'll be too big, but they're clean and warm." She accepted them gratefully. "Thank you. I'll just—" She glanced around the single-room cabin, obviously wondering where she might change in private. "I'll check on the horses," Ezekiel said quickly, understanding her dilemma. "Take your time." Outside, the storm had intensified, the rain so heavy he could barely see the lean-to though it was only steps away. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made the horses stamp nervously. Ezekiel soothed them with soft words and gentle hands, taking longer than necessary with his task to ensure Sophia had ample time to change. When he finally returned to the cabin, soaked once again, he found her standing by the stove in his clothes, her wet dress and undergarments spread nearby to dry. The shirt hung almost to her knees, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands, and she had used one of his bandanas as a belt to keep the trousers from sliding off her slender frame. Her damp hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and without the dirt of travel on her face, she looked younger and more vulnerable than ever. Yet there was nothing helpless about the way she moved efficiently around the small space, having already set water to boil on the stove and arranged their meager supplies on the table. "Your turn," she said, gesturing to his own soaked clothing. "I'll step outside." "No need to go out in that," he protested, nodding toward the raging storm. "Just turn your back. I'll be quick." She nodded, turning to face the wall while Ezekiel swiftly changed into his last set of dry clothes. The domesticity of the scene struck him again, this strange, intimate partnership they had formed in the space of 2 days. "All decent," he announced when he was finished. Sophia turned back, a slight blush coloring her cheeks despite the propriety they had maintained. Together, They prepared a simple meal from their provisions, supplemented by a jar of preserved peaches and some coffee Ezekiel found in the cabin's small store of supplies. As they ate, the storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the single window and wind finding every crack in the cabin's weathered walls. "We'll have to stay here tonight," Ezekiel said, glancing toward the window. "The creek we need to cross will be running too high to ford safely after this rain." Sophia nodded, looking troubled. "Do you think the storm will slow them down too?" "Harold and the sheriff, it should. They'd be fools to continue tracking in this weather." He studied her face in the warm light from the stove. "Are you worried?" "Always," she admitted quietly. "I know what Harold is capable of when he's angry, and he must be very angry now." Ezekiel reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "You're safe here, Sophia. I promise you that." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both innocent and profoundly intimate. "I believe you," she said softly. "That's what scares me most, I think. I haven't felt safe in so long. I'm afraid to trust the feeling." The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep in Ezekiel's heart. Without thinking, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then trust me instead. I won't let anything happen to you." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the storm outside, the danger pursuing them, even the impropriety of their situation faded away. There was only this connection between them, fragile but undeniable. Sophia was the first to look away, gently withdrawing her hand from his. "We should get some rest," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Tomorrow will be another long day." The practicality of their sleeping arrangements presented itself as an awkward problem. There was only the one narrow bed, barely wide enough for a single person. "Take the bed," Ezekiel said firmly. "I'll sleep on the floor near the stove." "No," Sophia protested. "You've had even less rest than I have these past 2 nights. You take the bed. I'm smaller, I'll be comfortable enough on the floor." Their argument continued in quiet, polite tones until Ezekiel finally sighed. "This is ridiculous. The bed is too small for both of us, and neither of us will sleep well on the hard floor. I propose a compromise. We alternate. You take the bed tonight, I'll take it tomorrow night if we're still on the trail." Sophia considered this, then nodded her agreement. "That seems fair, but I insist you take more than just your bedroll for the floor. There are extra blankets in that trunk." As they prepared for sleep, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify, the wind howling around the small cabin like a living thing seeking entry. Ezekiel banked the fire in the stove to last through the night, then settled onto his makeshift bed on the floor while Sophia took the narrow cot. "Good night, Ezekiel," she said softly from the darkness. "Good night, Sophia," he replied. "Sleep well." But sleep proved elusive for both of them as the storm raged on. After an hour of listening to the wind and rain, Sophia's voice came again through the darkness. "Ezekiel, are you awake?" "Yes," he admitted, turning toward the sound of her voice, though he could barely make out her form in the dim light from the banked stove. Would you tell me more about your ranch? About the life there? It helps to think about something peaceful." He smiled in the darkness, settling more comfortably on his bedroll. "Well, the house sits on a small rise overlooking a meadow that leads down to a creek. In the mornings, especially in spring and fall, mist rises from the water, making the whole world seem soft and new." He continued speaking softly, describing the rhythms of ranch life, the beauty of the changing seasons, the personalities of his horses, the quiet evenings spent on the porch watching the stars emerge. Gradually, Sophia's responses grew fewer and farther between, until her deep, even breathing told him she had finally fallen asleep. Only then did Ezekiel allow himself to close his eyes, lulled by the storm and the comforting presence of the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. He woke with a start some hours later, instantly alert to a change in his surroundings. The storm had quieted to a gentle patter of rain on the roof, and gray dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window. But it wasn't the change in the weather that had awakened him. It was Sophia's soft cries as she thrashed in the throes of a nightmare. "No, please," she whimpered, her voice small and frightened in a way he had never heard from her while awake. "I'll be good. Please don't." Ezekiel moved to her side without thinking, gently touching her shoulder. "Sophia," he said quietly, "wake up. You're dreaming." She came awake with a gasp, recoiling from his touch before recognition dawned in her eyes. "Ezekiel," she breathed, relaxing slightly. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "It's all right," he assured her, perching carefully on the edge of the narrow bed. "You were having a nightmare." She nodded, pushing her hair back from her face with trembling hands. "They come most nights. Memories, mostly." Without asking permission, Ezekiel reached out to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sophia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "After we were married, Harold insisted I give up teaching. He said no wife of his would work for wages. I didn't mind at first. I thought I would keep house, perhaps start a family." She swallowed hard. "But he was particular. Everything had to be just so. The first time he hit me was over a shirt I hadn't ironed to his satisfaction." Ezekiel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "It got worse over time. He began to drink more heavily, blame me for things beyond my control, lock me in our room for days if I displeased him." Her voice remained steady despite the horror of what she described. "The last time, 3 days before I ran, he broke my rib because I spilled tea on one of his business associates. That night, I knew I had to leave or I would die in that house." "How did you get away?" Ezekiel asked softly. "Harold was away overnight on business. I took what little money I had saved in secret and my mother's ring, which he hadn't yet sold. I planned to take the stagecoach, but someone must have seen me at the station and reported back to him. He returned early, and the sheriff was waiting for me when I tried to leave town on foot." She looked up at him, her eyes clear despite the pain of her memories. "And then you found me, or I found you." "Thank God for that," Ezekiel said fervently. His hand still rested lightly on her cheek, and he was acutely aware of how improper their position was, him sitting on her bed, her in his clothes, the two of them alone in this remote cabin. Yet he couldn't bring himself to move away. "Ezekiel," she said, her voice soft but steady, "what happens when we reach your ranch?" "Truly?" He met her gaze directly. "You'll be safe there for as long as you wish to stay. But eventually, Preston will have to be dealt with more permanently." "How?" "The law is on his side. A husband has rights over his wife, her property, her very freedom." "There are ways," Ezekiel said carefully. "Legal separations can be obtained with evidence of cruelty, though they're rare. Or, she prompted when he hesitated. Or a divorce could be sought in another state with more liberal laws. But it would take time, money, and you would likely face social ostracism afterward." Sophia sighed, leaning back against the thin pillow. "So my choices are to live in hiding, pursue a legal battle I'm unlikely to win, or become a social outcast." "There is another option," Ezekiel said slowly, the idea that had been forming in his mind since their first night on the trail finally taking shape. "But it's presumptuous of me to suggest it." "Tell me," she urged. "At this point, I would consider any option that offers true freedom." He took a deep breath. What if our pretense became reality? If you were truly my wife, Preston's claim would be invalidated. Bigamy is illegal, and he would have to prove his marriage came first. Sophia stared at him, clearly stunned by the suggestion. You would marry me? A woman you barely know. I know enough, Ezekiel said quietly. I know you're brave, resilient, and stronger than you believe. I know you're educated and capable. I know you deserve a chance at happiness. But marriage should be more than convenience or protection, she protested. It should be based on mutual respect and care, he finished for her. Which I already feel for you, Sophia. The rest affection, deeper feelings, those can grow with time, if given the chance. She studied his face in the gray dawn light, searching for something sincerity, perhaps, or hidden motives. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, for some of the tension left her shoulders. You would do this for me? Tie yourself legally to a woman who brings nothing but trouble to your door. I would do this for us both, he corrected gently. My life has been solitary for too long. My ranch prospers, but a home needs more than one person to truly be a home. A small smile touched her lips. Are you saying you need a housekeeper, Mr. Sutton? He returned her smile, relieved by her attempt at humor. I'm saying I need a partner, Mrs. Jacobs. Someone to share the work and the rewards. Someone to build a future with. The weight of his words hung between them in the quiet cabin. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, and birds had begun their morning songs. A new day was dawning, bringing with it the possibility of a future neither of them had imagined just days before. I don't need your answer now, Ezekiel said, finally standing and moving back to give her space. Think on it. We still have at least a day's journey to the ranch, and nothing needs to be decided until you're safely there. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful but no longer troubled. Thank you for the offer, Ezekiel. I will consider it carefully. As they prepared to depart the line shack, gathering their now dry clothing and repacking their supplies, Ezekiel found himself watching Sophia with new awareness. He had meant every word of his proposal, despite its unconventional nature and timing. In just 3 days, this woman had awakened feelings he had thought long buried, protective instincts, certainly, but also admiration, respect, and the stirrings of something that, given time, might grow into love. Whether she accepted his offer or not, he was committed to ensuring her safety and freedom. But as they mounted their horses and set out once more toward his ranch, Ezekiel found himself hoping that their journey together would not end when they reached their destination. Chapter 5. A turning point. The creek that had concerned Ezekiel was indeed swollen from the storm, but they found a crossing where fallen trees created a natural bridge sturdy enough for them to lead the horses across one at a time. By midday, they had left the worst of the flooded lowlands behind and were making good time across the rolling hills that marked the approach to Gillespie County. Sophia rode beside Ezekiel now rather than behind him, their horses moving at an easy trot through country that grew increasingly familiar to him. Though they remained vigilant, watching for signs of pursuit, the mood between them had lightened since their conversation in the line shack. Is that the Pedernales? Sophia asked, nodding toward a winding ribbon of water visible in the distance. Ezekiel smiled, pleased that she remembered his description of the ranch. It is. We'll follow it northwest for about 10 miles, then cut west. My property begins just beyond that line of hills. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and share a simple meal of jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples. As they sat side by side on a fallen log, Ezekiel found himself studying Sophia's profile, the delicate curve of her jaw, the determination in the set of her mouth, the way the sunlight brought out golden highlights in her hair. You're staring, she said without looking at him, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. Forgive me, he replied, not particularly repentant. I was just thinking that you look different today. Now she did turn to face him, curiosity in her blue eyes. Different how? Less afraid, he said simply. More yourself, perhaps. Sophia considered this, then nodded slowly. I feel different. For the first time in months, I can breathe without wondering if each breath will be my last. Even with Harold pursuing us, I feel hopeful. The word hung between them, fragile but beautiful, like the first wildflower after winter. I'm glad, Ezekiel said softly. He hesitated, then added, about what I said this morning. I've been thinking about it, she interrupted, her gaze direct. Your proposal, and he prompted when she didn't continue. And I have questions, practical ones. Her tone was matter of fact, the schoolteacher emerging. If we were to marry, what would you expect of me? As a wife, Ezekiel considered his answer carefully, understanding the importance of absolute honesty between them. I would expect partnership, respect, honesty. I would hope for friendship and eventually perhaps more. But I would never demand what wasn't freely given, Sophia. You would have a say in all aspects of our life together, including. He paused, a slight flush coloring his tanned face, including the more intimate aspects of marriage. Her own cheeks pinkened at his words, but she maintained her steady gaze. And children? Would you want them? I would, he admitted. I've always wanted a family. But again, that would be a decision we would make together, when and if you were ready. Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answers. One more question. If, after some time, you found that our arrangement wasn't what you hoped for, if there was no deeper affection developing, what then? It was a fair question, and one Ezekiel had considered himself. Then we would continue as partners and friends, if that was agreeable to you. I would never seek to dissolve our marriage or send you away. Once made, my commitment would be permanent, regardless of how our feelings might or might not develop. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she finally nodded. Thank you for your honesty. I haven't made my decision yet, but your answers help. Take all the time you need, he assured her. Nothing needs to be decided today. They resumed their journey shortly thereafter, and as the afternoon wore on, Ezekiel pointed out landmarks and boundaries that defined his ranch. Sophia listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her practical mind and genuine interest in understanding the operation he had built. It was nearly sunset when they crested a final hill, and the ranch house came into view, a sturdy log cabin with a wide front porch, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, a corral where several horses grazed, and a smaller cabin that Ezekiel explained housed his foreman and his wife. It's beautiful, Sophia said softly, taking in the peaceful scene bathed in the golden light of sunset. Before Ezekiel could respond, the front door of the ranch house opened, and a tall, lean man with dark hair streaked with silver emerged onto the porch, followed by a petite woman with a colorful shawl around her shoulders. Miguel and Rosa, Ezekiel explained as they urged their horses forward. My foreman and his wife. Good people. You'll like them. As they approached, Miguel strode out to meet them, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. Chief, we were beginning to worry. You're 3 days late. Had some unexpected delays, Ezekiel replied, dismounting and clasping the man's hand warmly. He turned to help Sophia down from Buck, his hands lingering slightly at her waist as she found her footing. Miguel, Rosa, this is Sophia Jacobs. She'll be staying with us for a while. If the couple was surprised by the unexpected guest, they hid it well. Rosa stepped forward immediately, her dark eyes warm and welcoming. Bienvenida, Señorita Jacobs. You must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside where it's warm. Thank you, Sophia replied with genuine gratitude. And please call me Sophia. As Rosa led Sophia toward the house, Miguel raised an eyebrow at Ezekiel. Trouble? He asked quietly, glancing at the dirt and fatigue evident on both their faces. Some, Ezekiel admitted. I'll explain later. For now, we should keep a careful watch. We may have been followed. Miguel nodded, his expression turning serious. I'll alert the men. No strangers will approach without us knowing. Good. And Miguel, Sophia's presence here needs to be kept quiet. At least for now. The foreman studied his employer's face for a moment, then nodded again. As you wish, Chief. Your business is your own. Inside the ranch house, Ezekiel found Rosa had already settled Sophia in a chair by the fire and was pressing a cup of hot coffee into her hands. The main room of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table and chairs in the center, and well-worn but quality furniture arranged for conversation. Doorways led to what Sophia presumed were bedrooms and perhaps a kitchen. I've put fresh water to heat for baths, Rosa announced as Ezekiel entered, and I'm preparing a proper meal. You both look half-starved. Rosa is a miracle worker, Ezekiel told Sophia with a fond smile for the older woman. Nothing escapes her notice, and she rules this house with an iron hand, despite it not being her official domain. Rosa snorted, but her eyes twinkled with affection. Someone must take care of you, Senor Sutton, since you do such a poor job of it yourself. She turned to Sophia. The guest room is ready for you, Senorita. Small but clean. I'll show you the way when you're ready for your bath. Thank you, Rosa. You're very kind. Sophia looked genuinely moved by the woman's matter-of-fact hospitality. Once Miguel and Rosa had left, he to alert the ranch hands about possible trouble. She to continue preparing the meal. Ezekiel sat in the chair opposite Sophia, stretching his long legs toward the fire. Welcome to Sutton Ranch, he said quietly. It's not much compared to Preston's place, I imagine, but it's perfect, Sophia interrupted, her eyes traveling around the room with genuine appreciation. Feels like a home, not a showpiece. Preston's house was all for display, expensive furniture no one was allowed to sit on. Rooms kept closed except when visitors came to be impressed. Ezekiel nodded, understanding. This place has been built piece by piece over the years. Everything here has a purpose or a memory attached to it. Like this? Sophia asked, her fingers tracing the carved arm of her chair, where a pattern of leaves and vines wound around the dark wood. My father made that chair, Ezekiel said softly. He was a skilled woodworker, taught me everything I know about working with my hands. Is he gone? 10 years now. My mother followed a year later. They're buried on that rise I told you about, where you can see the sunset. Sophia's expression softened with sympathy. You've known your share of loss. As have you, he replied simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire and the distant sounds of ranch life creating a peaceful backdrop to their thoughts. Ezekiel found himself watching Sophia as she gradually relaxed, the tension of their journey visibly draining from her body as she accepted that they had, at last, reached safety. When Rosa returned to announce that Sophia's bath was ready, Ezekiel rose to show her to the guest room himself. It was indeed small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the eastern hills. Rosa has left some clothes for you, he said, gesturing to a simple dress and undergarments laid out on the bed. They'll be a better fit than mine, at least. She's small like you. Thank you, Sophia said, then hesitated. Ezekiel, what will you tell them? About me, about why I'm here. He considered the question carefully. The truth, if you're comfortable with that. Miguel and Rosa are family to me. They can be trusted completely, and they'll understand. Miguel's sister was in a situation similar to yours once. What happened to her? She found help, started a new life in San Antonio. She's a seamstress there now with her own shop. He paused. Whatever you decide about your future, about my proposal, they'll support you. We all will. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'd like to tell them myself, if that's all right. After dinner, perhaps. Of course. It's your story to tell. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sophia. Yes. I meant what I said earlier. You're safe here for as long as you choose to stay, regardless of any other decisions. I want you to know that. The smile she gave him then was the most genuine he had seen from her, warm and reaching all the way to her eyes. I know, Ezekiel, and that means more to me than I can express. Later, after they had both bathed and changed into clean clothes, they gathered around the table for the hearty meal. Rosa had prepared beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved vegetables from the garden. Miguel joined them, and the conversation flowed easily as Ezekiel recounted portions of their journey, carefully editing the more dangerous aspects while sharing amusing anecdotes about their time on the trail. After the meal, as they sat with coffee and Rosa's apple pie, Sophia gently steered the conversation toward her own story. With quiet dignity, she explained her marriage to Preston, the abuse she had suffered, and her desperate flight that had led to her fortuitous meeting with Ezekiel. He claimed I had stolen from him, she concluded, but the only things I took were my mother's wedding ring and the money I had saved from my teaching days before we were married. Still, the sheriff was his friend, and in Willow Creek, Harold Preston's word is law. Rosa reached across the table to cover Sophia's hand with her own. You were right to run, Nina. No woman should endure such treatment, husband or no husband. Miguel nodded his agreement, his expression grave. And now this man pursues you still? Yes, Ezekiel confirmed. He and the sheriff were tracking us. We lost them in the storm, but I doubt they've given up. Then we must be vigilant, Miguel said firmly. I will speak with the men tomorrow. Extra guards, especially along the south and east approaches. And you, Rosa said to Sophia, must rest and recover your strength. You're safe here with us. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at the simple acceptance and support. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what that means to me. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Ezekiel walked Sophia to the door of the guest room. They paused there, suddenly awkward in a way they hadn't been even when sharing the small line shack. Sleep well, he said softly. If you need anything during the night, my room is just across the hall. She nodded, then surprised him by rising on tiptoe to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. Thank you, Ezekiel, for everything. Before he could respond, she had slipped into her room, closing the door quietly behind her. Ezekiel stood there for a moment, his hand rising unconsciously to touch the spot where her lips had brushed his skin. Whatever happened next, whether Sophia accepted his proposal or chose another path entirely, he knew with sudden clarity that his life had been irrevocably changed by the brave woman who had literally run into his arms 4 days ago. And he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 6. New beginnings. The next few days established a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural to both Ezekiel and Sophia. Each morning, he would rise before dawn to begin his ranch work, returning to the house for breakfast that Sophia helped Rosa prepare. During the days, Sophia gradually integrated herself into the household routine, assisting Rosa with cooking and cleaning, learning the layout of the ranch, and even beginning to organize Ezekiel's neglected collection of books into a proper small library in a corner of the main room. In the evenings, they would gather for dinner with Miguel and Rosa, sometimes joined by 1 or 2 of the ranch hands, sharing stories and gradually getting to know each other better in this more relaxed setting. After the meal, Ezekiel and Sophia often sat together by the fire, reading or talking quietly until it was time to retire to their separate rooms. Throughout it all, the unspoken question of Ezekiel's proposal hung between them. He had meant it when he said she could take all the time she needed to decide, and he was careful not to pressure her in any way. Still, he couldn't help but notice the way she watched him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, a thoughtful expression on her face, as if she were trying to envision a future with him. On the fourth day, as Sophia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Rosa joined her, taking up a sheet and deftly pinning it in place. "You are good for him," the older woman said without preamble. "I have not seen Ezekiel so at peace in many years." Sophia blushed, focusing intently on the shirt in her hands. "He's been very kind to me." Rosa made a dismissive sound. "Kindness, yes, but it is more than that, I think." She paused in her work, fixing Sophia with a direct gaze. "He has offered marriage, has he not?" Startled, Sophia nearly dropped the clothespin she was holding. "How did you know?" "I have known that man since he was 22 years old and just starting this ranch. I know the look in his eyes when he has made up his mind about something important." Rosa smiled gently. "And I see the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching." Sophia sighed, abandoning the pretense of focusing on the laundry. "He has offered, yes, for protection primarily, to invalidate Preston's claim on me. Is that all it is to you? Protection?" The question was gentle but probing, and Sophia found herself considering it carefully. "No," she admitted finally. "Not anymore. When we first met, when he claimed me as his wife to save me from the sheriff, it was simply a desperate measure. But now you have feelings for him," Rosa finished for her when Sophia trailed off. "I admire him greatly," Sophia said carefully. "He is kind, honorable, hard-working. Any woman would be fortunate to have such a husband." Rosa's eyes twinkled knowingly. "That is not what I asked, Nina." Sophia laughed softly, acknowledging the gentle challenge. "Yes, I have feelings for him, but it's complicated. I've only known him a week, and my experience with marriage has been—" She shuddered slightly. "Less than encouraging." "Ezekiel is nothing like your first husband," Rosa said firmly. "This I can promise you. I have watched him build this ranch from nothing, treat every person who works for him with respect, mourn his family with dignity. He is a good man, through and through." "I believe that," Sophia assured her. "I've seen it in how he treats everyone, including me. But marriage is a lifetime commitment. Shouldn't there be more than respect and gratitude? Shouldn't there be love?" Rosa picked up another sheet, shaking it out with practiced hands. "Love grows, Sophia. Sometimes it begins with a spark passion, desire, infatuation. Other times it grows from a foundation of respect and friendship. The second kind, I think, often burns longer and steadier." "Is that how it was with you and Miguel?" The older woman smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "For us it was both, the spark and the foundation. We were young, passionate, but we also respected each other from the beginning. 42 years later, that respect remains, while the passion ebbs and flows with the seasons of life." Sophia considered this as they finished hanging the laundry in comfortable silence. When the last piece was secured on the line, Rosa turned to her once more. "You have time to decide, Nina, but remember this: no marriage is without risk. The question is not whether there will be difficulties, but who you wish to face them with." With those words of wisdom, Rosa returned to the house, leaving Sophia to her thoughts among the gently flapping laundry. Later that afternoon, Ezekiel was working in the corral with a young colt when he spotted Sophia approaching, carrying what appeared to be a canteen and a small bundle. He smiled at the sight of her, noting how the simple blue dress she wore, borrowed from Rosa, but altered to fit her more slender frame, complemented her eyes and brought color to her cheeks. "I thought you might be thirsty," she called as she reached the fence. And Rosa sent some of those biscuits you like. Ezekiel secured the colt and crossed to where she stood, accepting the canteen gratefully. Thank you. I was just thinking about taking a break. What are you teaching him? Sophia asked, nodding toward the young horse who was watching them curiously. Just basic handling for now. Getting him used to the saddle and bridle. He's still too young to ride, but the early training makes everything easier later. Ezekiel took a long drink of water, then gestured to the biscuits. Will you join me? They sat together on a bench outside the corral, sharing the simple snack while watching the horses graze. Sophia seemed thoughtful, almost nervous, and Ezekiel wondered if something was troubling her. Is everything all right? He asked finally. You seem preoccupied. She smiled slightly, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Just thinking. Rosa and I had an interesting conversation while hanging laundry earlier. Oh, Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. Should I be concerned? Rosa has an impressive collection of embarrassing stories about me. Sophia laughed, the sound bright and genuine. No, nothing like that, though now I'm curious about these stories. Another time, perhaps, he promised with a smile. What was your conversation about then? She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. Marriage, specifically your proposal. Ezekiel stilled, suddenly very aware of his heartbeat. I see. I've been thinking about it a great deal, Sophia continued, her voice steady despite the slight flush in her cheeks. Weighing the practical aspects, certainly, but also other considerations. Such as? He prompted when she paused. Such as the fact that I barely know you, yet I feel more comfortable in your presence than I ever did with Harold, even during our courtship. She looked away, toward the distant hills. Such as the way you treat those around you with respect and kindness. The way you've never once made me feel that your help comes with expectations or demands. Ezekiel remained silent, sensing she had more to say. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Not of you, never that, but of making another mistake, of trusting too quickly, of being a burden rather than a partner. You could never be a burden, Sophia, he said gently, and your caution is understandable, given what you've experienced. I wouldn't expect you to trust easily after what Preston did. She turned back to him, her blue eyes searching his face. But that's just it, Ezekiel. I do trust you. Despite every rational reason to be wary, I trust you completely. And that terrifies me almost as much as it reassures me. Ezekiel took a risk then, reaching out to take her hand in his. Trust your instincts, Sophia. They led you to run from Preston. They led you to accept my help that day in town. What are they telling you now? For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes never leaving his. Then, with a deep breath, she said, They're telling me to say yes. The world seemed to still around them as her words hung in the air between them. Ezekiel's heart pounded in his chest, hope and joy surging through him. Yes? He repeated, needing to be certain he had understood. Sophia nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Yes, Ezekiel Sutton. I will marry you. For protection, yes, but also because I believe we could build something real together. Something good. His answering smile was radiant. Without thinking, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. I promise you won't regret this, Sophia. I'll spend every day making sure of it. I have conditions, she added, though her expression remained warm. I want us to truly know each other before the marriage is fully consummated. A blush colored her cheeks at the direct reference to the intimate aspect of their arrangement. And I want to contribute meaningfully to the ranch, not just keep house. I was a teacher, but I'm a quick learner. I can help with the accounts, perhaps even establish a small school for the children of your workers and neighboring ranches eventually. Anything, Ezekiel agreed readily. Those aren't conditions, Sophia. They're reasonable expectations for a partnership, which is exactly what I want our marriage to be. The happiness in her eyes at his easy acceptance made his heart swell. On impulse, he stood, pulling her gently to her feet as well. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "To seal our agreement properly?" Sophia's blush deepened, but she nodded, stepping closer to him. "I would like that." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, Ezekiel bent his head to hers. Their lips met in a gentle, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through his entire body. Her hand came up to rest lightly on his chest, and he could feel the slight tremble in her fingers as the kiss lingered for a sweet moment before they both pulled back. "Well," Sophia said a bit breathlessly, her eyes bright. "That was a promising beginning?" Ezekiel suggested, unable to keep the smile from his face. She laughed, the sound unguarded and joyful. "Yes, very promising indeed." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. Miguel was riding toward them at a canter, his expression serious enough to immediately put Ezekiel on alert. "What is it?" he called as his foreman drew near. "Riders approaching from the east," Miguel reported. 3 men, one matching the description of Sheriff Blackwood. They're about 2 miles out, moving steadily toward the ranch house. Ezekiel's arm went protectively around Sophia's waist as he felt her stiffen beside him. "Preston." "I believe so, Jeef. The second rider is well dressed. City clothes rather than ranch wear." "How did they find us?" Sophia whispered, fear evident in her voice despite her efforts to control it. "It doesn't matter," Ezekiel said firmly. "They've come to my land now. We'll deal with them on our terms." He turned to Miguel. "Alert the men. No one draws a weapon unless absolutely necessary, but I want a show of strength. And send someone to town for Judge Wilson. Tell him it's urgent." Miguel nodded, understanding the plan without needing further explanation. "What about Señorita Jacobs?" Ezekiel looked down at Sophia, who had recovered her composure and now stood straight and determined beside him. "Mrs. Sutton will be with me when we meet them," he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. It's time Preston understood that his claim has been superseded. "We're not married yet," Sophia reminded him quietly. Ezekiel smiled grimly. "He doesn't know that, and soon enough it will be true." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Are you ready for this confrontation? You don't have to face him if you're not." Sophia took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders. "I'm done running, Ezekiel. It's time I stood my ground." The pride he felt at her courage nearly overwhelmed him. Without another word, he led her toward the house, where they would prepare to face the man who had caused her so much pain and end his power over her once and for all. Chapter 7. Confrontation. Ezekiel and Sophia stood together on the front porch of the ranch house, a united front as they watched the 3 riders approach. Behind them, Miguel and 4 ranch hands formed a protective semicircle, their postures relaxed but vigilant. Rosa had been sent to the foreman's cabin with strict instructions to stay there until the situation was resolved. As the riders drew closer, Ezekiel could feel Sophia's tension in the rigid set of her shoulders, though her face remained composed. He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone anymore." She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "I know." Sheriff Blackwood led the small party, his official badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Beside him rode a man who could only be Harold Preston, expensively dressed in a tailored suit despite the dust of travel, with cold eyes and a handsome face that betrayed no emotion beyond a slight sneer of disdain as he surveyed the ranch. The third man was the deputy from Willow Creek, looking uncomfortable and out of place. They reined in their horses in the yard, and Sheriff Blackwood tipped his hat with a show of politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, Mr. Sutton. Hope you don't mind us paying this unexpected visit." "What brings you to my property, Sheriff?" Ezekiel asked, his tone civil but cool. Preston didn't wait for the sheriff to respond. His gaze fixed on Sophia with an intensity that made Ezekiel instinctively step slightly in front of her. "You know very well why we're here, Sutton," Preston said, his cultured voice at odds with the menace in his tone. "You've taken my wife. I've come to bring her home where she belongs." "Your wife?" Ezekiel raised an eyebrow, his expression one of polite confusion. "I believe you're mistaken, Mr. Preston. The only woman here is my wife, Sophia Sutton." Preston's face darkened with anger. "This charade has gone far enough. That woman is Sophia Preston, my lawfully wedded wife of 6 months. I have the marriage certificate to prove it." "As do I," Ezekiel countered smoothly. "Sophia and I have been married for 2 years. Your claim is invalid." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now see here, Sutton. We have documented proof of Preston's marriage. If you're claiming prior rights, you need to produce your own documentation." "Of course," Ezekiel agreed easily. "I'd be happy to show you our marriage certificate. But first, perhaps you'd be good enough to explain what gives a sheriff from Willow Creek the authority to make demands on my property in Gillespie County." That brought the sheriff up short, as Ezekiel had intended. Before the lawman could respond, Preston dismounted, his movements sharp with barely controlled rage. "Enough of this nonsense. Sophia, come here. Now." His voice cracked like a whip, clearly accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sophia flinched almost imperceptibly but stood her ground, her hand still firmly in Ezekiel's. "No, Harold. I'm not going anywhere with you." Preston's face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful, disobedient, careful Preston." Ezekiel interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "You're speaking to my wife on my land, in front of witnesses. Choose your next words with extreme care." For a tense moment, the two men locked eyes in silent challenge. Then Preston smiled coldly, visibly regaining control of his temper. "Your loyalty to a woman you barely know is admirable, Sutton. Misguided, but admirable." He turned to the sheriff. "Blackwood, I believe we've established that this man has no legal claim to my wife. Do your duty." The sheriff hesitated, clearly uncertain about his jurisdiction. "Mr. Preston, we're outside my county here. I can't just—" "You can and you will," Preston snapped. "Or perhaps you'd prefer I speak to your brother about his position on my ranch. Or mention to the bank that I'm reconsidering holding the mortgage on your property." The naked threat hung in the air, confirming everything Sophia had told Ezekiel about Preston's influence in Willow Creek. The sheriff's face hardened, but he dismounted and stepped forward. "Mrs. Preston, I need you to come with us," he said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Ezekiel's ranch hands tensed, hands drifting toward their own weapons, but Ezekiel gave a subtle shake of his head. Violence would only complicate matters, especially against a lawman, corrupt or not. "Sheriff," he said firmly, "you have no authority here. This is Gillespie County, and you know it. If Mr. Preston has a legal claim to make, he can take it up with Judge Wilson in Fredericksburg. Until then, I suggest you leave my property before I'm forced to consider this an unlawful invasion." The standoff might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of 2 more riders, one of whom wore the distinctive star of the Gillespie County Sheriff's Department. Ezekiel recognized Deputy Marshal Evans, a fair-minded man he had known for years. "Afternoon, folks," Evans called as he rode into the yard. "Sutton, Miguel sent word there might be trouble brewing out here." "No trouble, Deputy," Ezekiel replied, relief evident in his voice. Just a misunderstanding about jurisdiction and marital claims. Evans dismounted, nodding to Sheriff Blackwood with the cool courtesy of one lawman to another. Blackwood, you're a ways from home. Official business, Blackwood said stiffly. This man has abducted Mrs. Preston and is claiming her as his wife. Evans raised an eyebrow, turning to Ezekiel. That true? Not at all, Ezekiel replied calmly. This is my wife, Sophia Sutton. Mr. Preston seems to believe she belongs to him, despite our prior claim. The deputy looked thoughtful. Complicated situation. Fortunately, Judge Wilson will be arriving soon. He can sort this out properly. Preston's confident demeanor faltered slightly at the mention of the judge. This is a waste of time. The woman is my wife, and I have documentation to prove it. Then you'll have no objection to presenting that documentation to the judge, Evans said reasonably. In the meantime, I suggest everyone calm down. Mr. Sutton, perhaps we could all wait more comfortably inside. It was the last thing Ezekiel wanted Harold Preston inside his home, near Sophia, but he recognized the wisdom of Evans's suggestion. Defusing the tension and waiting for the judge was their best course of action. Of course, he agreed. Sheriff Blackwood, Mr. Preston. Deputy, you're welcome to wait on the porch. I'll have coffee brought out. He turned to Miguel. Would you ask Rosa to prepare refreshments for our guests? Miguel nodded, understanding the unspoken message to bring Rosa back to the main house now that additional law enforcement had arrived. As the men arranged themselves on the porch, Preston and Blackwood sitting stiffly on one bench, Evans on another, the Willow Creek deputy standing awkwardly to the side, Ezekiel drew Sophia slightly apart. Are you all right? He asked quietly, searching her face for signs of distress. She nodded, though her complexion was pale. Seeing him again is difficult, but I'm managing. If it becomes too much, you can wait inside. You don't have to face him. Sophia shook her head firmly. No, I need to do this. I need him to see that I'm not afraid anymore. That I won't be controlled by fear of him ever again. Pride swelled in Ezekiel's chest at her courage. You're remarkable. Do you know that? The smile she gave him was small but genuine. I'm beginning to believe it, thanks to you. When Rosa arrived with coffee and a plate of fresh biscuits, the group fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by Preston's occasional pointed comments about property rights and a husband's authority. Each time, Ezekiel had to fight the urge to put his fist through the man's smug face, particularly when he saw how Sophia flinched at certain phrases, clearly triggering memories of her time under Preston's control. Finally, after what seemed an interminable wait, the sound of an approaching buggy signaled Judge Wilson's arrival. The judge was a portly man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that had earned him respect throughout the county. Quite the gathering, he observed as he climbed down from his buggy. Deputy Evans says we have a disputed marriage claim to sort out? That's correct, Your Honor, Ezekiel confirmed, stepping forward to shake the judge's hand. Thank you for coming so quickly. The judge nodded, his gaze taking in the assembled group with practiced assessment. Let's get to the heart of the matter, then. I understand both you and Mr. Preston claim to be legally married to this young woman. Her name is Sophia Preston, Harold interjected before Ezekiel could respond. She is my wife, married in Willow Creek this past April. I have the certificate here. He withdrew a folded document from his jacket pocket and handed it to the judge. Judge Wilson examined the paper carefully, then looked to Ezekiel. Mr. Sutton, your evidence. This was the moment of truth. Ezekiel had been gambling on the judge's arrival before this point in the confrontation. He took a deep breath and spoke with complete honesty. Your Honor, Sophia and I plan to be married, but we are not yet legally wed. However, I believe her prior marriage to Preston is invalidated by his treatment of her. Preston laughed triumphantly. So you admit the deception? She is my wife, and you have no claim to her at all. The judge raised a hand for silence. Mr. Sutton, are you alleging abuse? I am, Your Honor. Sophia fled Preston's home in fear for her life after months of escalating violence. Judge Wilson turned his penetrating gaze to Sophia. Young lady, is this true? Sophia stepped forward, her head held high despite the slight tremor in her hands. It is, Your Honor. Harold Mr. Preston began physically abusing me within days of our wedding. It grew worse over time, culminating in broken ribs and this. She pushed back her hair to reveal the fading bruise at her temple. I feared he would eventually kill me in one of his rages. Lies, Preston hissed. She was always clumsy, always falling or walking into doors. I never laid a hand on her. Strange, Rosa said suddenly from where she stood in the doorway. The bruise on her neck looks remarkably like fingerprints. Did she fall onto a hand? Perhaps. The judge frowned, gesturing for Sophia to approach. Gently, he examined the bruise Rosa had mentioned, now faded to a yellowish green but still visible beneath her collar. Mrs. Preston or Ms. Jacobs, as I perhaps should call you, did you report this abuse to the authorities in Willow Creek? Sophia's bitter laugh held no humor. To Sheriff Blackwood, whose brother works for Preston and whose mortgage is held by him as well. No, Your Honor. There was no one in Willow Creek who would have believed me or helped me leave. I was trapped. The judge nodded, his expression grave as he turned back to Preston. Your actions are serious, Mr. Preston. If these allegations are substantiated, it would certainly impact your legal claims to Mrs. Jacobs. However, for now, let's focus on the matter at hand. He placed both marriage certificates on the table, comparing the dates and details. After what felt like an eternity, he finally addressed the group. It is my ruling that while Mr. Preston's marriage to Sophia Jacobs is legally recognized, the conditions under which it was formed raise significant questions regarding its validity. We will need to conduct a full investigation into these claims of abuse before any further legal action can be taken. Ezekiel felt a surge of hope at the judge's words. What does that mean for now, Your Honor? It means that Mrs. Jacobs will remain in your care, Mr. Sutton, until such time as we have a clear path forward. This is your property, and she will not be forced to leave against her wishes. Preston's face contorted with rage as the implications of the judge's ruling sank in. This isn't over, he spat, glaring at Ezekiel. I'll ensure you pay for this insubordination. Ezekiel stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. You dismissed her as property, Preston. She's a woman, a survivor, and she's not going back to you. No one can own another person, not in this day and age, and I will fight to ensure that remains the case. The sheriff and deputy exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. And it's time for you to leave my ranch, Ezekiel added, pointing toward the path of their arrival. Any further pursuit of this matter must be done legally, through the proper channels. I suggest you take your business back to Willow Creek before you find the people of Gillespie County less inclined to tolerate your behavior. Blackwood hesitated, the gears in his mind visibly turning as he weighed his options. Ultimately, he gave a short nod. We'll file the necessary paperwork for the inquiry into your claims, Mr. Preston. But let it be clear, I won't tolerate any further threats or intimidation toward the Jacobs family or Mr. Sutton. With a final scowl directed at Sophia and Ezekiel, Preston mounted his horse, flanked by Blackwood and the deputy. They rode away, leaving behind an uneasy silence. As soon as they were out of sight, Ezekiel turned back to Sophia and the judge. Thank you, Judge Wilson. Your support means everything. The judge smiled faintly. You did well, Mr. Sutton. The It's clear this young woman has been through enough. I'll ensure the investigation into Mr. Preston's conduct is taken seriously." After a few more words of assurance, the judge mounted his buggy and headed for home, leaving Ezekiel and Sophia standing on the porch amidst the breath-controlled tension that had filled the space. Glancing at each other, they both felt the weight of what had just transpired. Depression stirred but was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. Ezekiel stepped close, enveloping Sophia in a warm embrace, feeling her tremble against him as she finally let go of some of her pent-up emotions. "It's over," he whispered, holding her tightly. "We did it." For the first time since they had met, Sophia allowed herself to fully relax against him, breathing in the weight of the moment and the scent of safety surrounding Ezekiel. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I couldn't have faced them without you." "You have more strength than you know," he replied earnestly, drawing back slightly to look into her eyes, which were now shining with unshed tears of relief and gratitude. "You deserve a life free of fear." As if sensing the gravity of their newfound safety and their connection, Sophia's gaze softened, and Ezekiel leaned in, brushing his lips gently against hers. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with an intensity fueled by shared experiences and the hope of what lay ahead. "Perhaps this can be our new beginning," Ezekiel suggested as they pulled apart, both slightly breathless. Sophia nodded, a spark of determination igniting in her eyes. "We can build a future worth fighting for." Ezekiel grinned, filled with hope. "Then let's get started." As they stepped back into the warmth of the ranch house, they knew that together they could face anything: the past, the present, and the future.